I love the Demon's Souls remake so much. Not enough people play this game. It was too hard to get a PlayStation 5 at launch when this game came out, and by the time a lot of people had PlayStation 5s, it was Elden Ring o'clock. I got the Platinum Trophy on Demon's Souls before, using a bonk build, which felt strong but kind of obvious. So I wanted to revisit Demon's Souls, but find an interesting method of beating the game a second time. There's Pure Magic, which could be a fun challenge in the future. But one innocuous weapon stood out to me from the weapons list. The Baby's Nail, a weak-ass dagger, but one of only 2 ways in the game to inflict the Plague status. Plague kicked my ass on my first play. You catch it early on from some rats, then it's a theme of one of the boss encounters, and it does very quick damage. It feels closer to standing in lava than being poisoned. So what I wanted to do is plan out a whole run centered around getting Plague effects as early as possible, then using them on every enemy. Hence, my Plague-only run was born. But that had several problems. For one, the Plague buildup is attached to a dagger, so there's no avoiding slash damage. There's no way to do a pure Plague run. Second, and more important, it's only a minority of bosses who can even be plagued. Hence, my Plague and Poison only run was born. This brought 7 bosses into vulnerable territory, but still not all of them. Hence, my Plague, Poison, and Bleed only run was born. This added 2 more bosses into consideration for killing via status effects, but there are still 7 bosses who are, quite unnecessarily in my opinion, immune to all 3 status effects. So I stabbed the crap out of these bosses with a weapon that would be inflicting bleed if it could, and called it good enough. My rules for this run: only deal damage through Plague, Poison, and Bleed. Now, Bleed innately requires hitting them with a weapon to apply the status, so I am writing off any physical damage that I had to deal in order to proc these effects. I'm only allowed to level stats that help me inflict these statuses, or stay alive while they do their job. This means Intelligence up to 14 to get the 2 memory slots I need to equip Death Cloud, Endurance to increase my stamina, which will help me make more consecutive swings to more quickly build up statuses through attacking, and Vitality to stay alive. It was actually a fantastic blessing to me to be able to focus on leveling Endurance and Vitality. Usually I go more glass cannon-y and go for the damaging stats rather than the stay alive stats, and it felt really good to be able to soak hits in this run. I'm also throwing away any gear that does not accomplish my goals of putting a status effect on enemies. But instead of using discard, what I tried to do was look for a fire somewhere in the level and then drop a pile of weapons as though I was burning them. This one's not a rule, but I just slashed through most enemies in the levels using my Falchion, and they would die before the bleed happens. Now, maybe I could have stocked up on Spice and used Poison Cloud for literally every enemy, but this has a flaw anyway, because a lot of enemies in this game won't even let statuses kill them. They'll heal themselves first at low hit points. So yeah, I just slash them down with a weapon that would inflict and kill them with bleeding in a perfect world. You'll also see me attack bosses who already have statuses on, and that's in order to help make sure the statuses become lethal. Otherwise, the boss would run out of the status at such low hit points that I couldn't reapply the status without them dying first to my physical attacks. Don't worry about it. We start out as the Wanderer class for their Falchion, which comes with Bleed. We randomize appearance until we get someone who looks like their job is spreading plague, name ourselves the Rotten after everybody's favorite Dark Souls 2 boss, and we start in World 1-1. It's an uneventful trip to the boss, though I do accidentally pick up some gross non-statusy items that I have to yeet. Phalanx is the boss here for World 1-1. Its hoplite enemies actually can be bled here, especially if you attack their front, as it seemed to build up bleed even through the shield. But that's kind of annoying, so I just wiped out the hoplites as efficiently as I could, then got the boss bleeding and waited it out. 1 down. World 3-1 is next, the Prison of Hope, for 2 important reasons. There's a Mercury Rapier that we can pick up for poison damage, and we can enter the boss's room and not kill the boss to retrieve the main show of this run, the Baby's Nail. On the way there, we learn that the Sphere of Limbs can be bled, which is pretty cool. We also rescue Sage Freak, who is going to eventually sell us both our poison and plague spells. Now, the Fextra Life wiki tells me that the boss of 3-1 is immune to all 3 status effects, which is probably true. But in case it's not true and she actually just has extremely high resistance, I want to try fighting her later on when my weapons are upgraded for maximum status buildup anyway, so I use an Archstone Shard to teleport out. Up next is 5-1, the Depraved Chasm. Now this boss's soul can be turned into Freak for Poison Cloud, a spell which not only inflicts very high poison buildup, but which causes no other damage. So I want this spell to help keep our run as close as possible to a pure status-only build. Leechmonger is the boss. It's immune to all 3 status effects. Just in case that's not true, I give it an honest go with the Baby's Nail, but he easily is out healing the chip damage from this dagger, so I just changed to the Falchion and hit him for several minutes. Poison Cloud is now secured, so my next goal is to be able to upgrade the baby's nail, which requires us to first kill the boss of 2-2. Hence, we first head to 2-1 to take out the armor spider. But Jimothy, you might want to comment, you could just do 5-2 and 5-3 instead to get Death Cloud, and you're killing 2 bosses either way. Sure, but I wanted the baby's nail to be the focus of the run, and I only just acquired it, so I'm going to make hay while the sun shines. And the baby's nail actually does deal more plague damage at max upgrade than Death Cloud ticks for. Anyway, Armor Spider is immune to all 3 status effects, annoyingly, and it's pretty resistant to my crappy weapon and starting stats. I really do love this fight, though. Next, I chose a detour to visit 5-2 the swamp to farm some sucker stones and officially make my Falchion a tearing weapon so that I can start increasing its bleed buildup. While I struggle against some sluggles, let me fill you in on how these status effects all work to the unfamiliar. They all do damage over time. They have different total durations, but the tick damage is actually very close numerically across all 3. Call it on average about 5 per second. Bleed lasts a minute, poison 3, and plague 10 minutes. That's the only difference. And it's pretty rare for fights to last long enough that the different durations are even relevant. Bleed makes you work for it because it only comes by striking with a bleed-capable melee weapon. You have to endanger yourself to strike a boss multiple times in a row to get bleed, so for balance reasons, I don't see why every boss shouldn't bleed. And lore-wise, there aren't any skeleton bosses in Demon Souls or anything. Every boss has some sort of liquidy filling like a gusher, be it blood or bile, that could be considered its blood, so I think everything should bleed. Poison works on about half of the bosses, but it's almost free to inflict, be it from Poison Cloud, Kunai, or Poison Arrows. I think that Poison Cloud works a little too well since it outclasses the other options, but I do like that Poison has ranged applications to differentiate it from Bleed. I just wish it felt a little bit different in any way, like being easier to apply but therefore causing less damage in trade. Now I don't think Poison should do less damage, maybe Bleed should be buffed. Plague is the 3rd status, and it's literally just Poison 2.0 in PvE. It doesn't tick for more damage, and it's equally as free to inflict via Death Cloud as long as the enemy is not immune. For all the work that it took maximizing the baby's nail, its damage was still pitiful, and I can in no circumstances recommend the baby's nail over Death Cloud, especially considering the opportunity cost of blowing your limited colorless demon souls on that weapon. Snap back to the run where I didn't know yet that Plague wouldn't be fantastic. I wanted to kill Flame Lurker in 2-2 next. But despite my best attempts and the wiki saying it's possible, I could not get Plague on that boy after wailing on him with the baby's nail. So low on resources, I pivot to 4-1, where I take out the non-boss Vanguard Demon with both Bleed and Poison, then the Adjudicator boss, who is immune to all 3 status effects. I imagine that's so they can force you to play by his gimmick of having to attack his stomach so that he falls down and then you can then hit the bird on his head. Still, why can't the bird bleed? Demon Souls players know that there's a fantastic farming spot right after this boss, so I farm enough healing items that I can make reps on Flame Lurker without having to ration them. I also go ahead and pick up a longbow so we can status one certain boss later. If you already know what I'm talking about, leave a comment telling me how smart you are. With a bunch of healing items in hand, it's back to Flame Lurker, and I really give him the business this time with Baby's Nail just to make sure that I was not missing the plague. I chip him down for dozens and dozens of hits with this weapon that is no longer than a stick of butter and hits about as hard before concluding that he's gotta be just straight immune. Now, one more try against Flame Lurker, setting Plague aside, I proc Poison very quickly and bleed after a bit of effort. After several minutes, the Flame Lurker is down, and he does look very, very cool with the poison glow applied over his fire. Having killed Flame Lurker, I can now hand his soul to the blacksmith, who will allow me to now upgrade the Baby's Nail up to 5 times. That's once per colorless demon soul. There's one of these available in each area per run by killing a primeval demon under pure black world tendency. My next goal was going to be Man-Eaters, mostly because I was in their area of 3-2 anyway, collecting Mercury Stone to upgrade my Poison Rapier. But with my bleed buildup still so low, the Man-Eaters tossed me around in a major way, and I decided to put them off. To power up against them, I decide it's time to finally embrace Death Cloud. I take out the triply immune Dirty Colossus in World 5-2, then I head directly into the 5-3 boss, which has no intervening level. The boss is Maiden Astraya, whom the wiki has as immune to all 3 status effects. Remember this for later. Now, protecting her though is a powerful NPC, Garl Vinland, whom the wiki has as weak to all 3. Well, I try my damnedest for several minutes on all of the status effects, and Garl does not get any of them. I was about to get mad. I scrutinized the wiki again. Now, supposedly the wiki has the stats listed not for the boss version of Garl Vinland, but for the Black Phantom version of him, who can be statused. I don't think that was a smart choice to put on the wiki. So, the boss version is actually immune to all 3 status effects, and killing him even without those is no cakewalk. I die trying quite a few times. Then, I grit my teeth and give in to learning the Souls mechanic that has evaded me longest, parrying. It actually works just fine. So, if anyone else is afraid of parrying, I would say give this boss a try. With Garl subdued, I can now approach Maiden Estrella. I try my Diagnostic Poison Cloud and Plague Needling, which come up negative as expected. Then I resign myself to chopping her down with my Falchion when a miracle occurs. I step away for a moment, but her health bar keeps decreasing. Maiden Estrella is not bleed immune. Tragically, the bleed does wear off before she's dead, but she has 2 low hit points for me to inflict it again, so instead I just throw a million kunai at her like fish food at a koi pond and pretend that those are ticks of status damage. It almost looks like it is if you don't see me throw. So I disproved the wiki about Maiden Estrella's bleed susceptibility and unlocked Death Cloud. 4 stars, would fight again. Now before this, I had actually snuck in some unsuccessful Tower Knight attempts without telling you, and I am so sorry for that. But these were diagnostic runs, smacking the absolute plasma out of this boy with the baby's nail trying to get him plagued, then with the Falchion trying to bleed him, as he's allegedly susceptible to both. The reason I wanted to break down and get Death Cloud now was because I was gaslit into thinking my plague buildup just wasn't good enough with the baby's nail. Nope, he is fully immune to plague and bleed. So we return to Tower Knight, the boss of World 1-2, and do the only status that can affect him, we poison him to death. With Tower Knight down, we have access now to another colorless demon soul for upgrading the nail. Here, I figure I'll try out status effects on the primeval demons just for laughs. It turns out they can be plagued, a rare treat. Weirdly, I discover here that they can be poisoned too. Now, there's a primeval demon just bing chilling in the swamps of World 5-2, so I had figured they were immune to poison, but I guess not. Things are starting to feel like cleanup now that we have both cloud spells and the baby nail almost fully upgraded. I take out Dragon God next after making sure that he's immune to all 3. He is a gimmick fight, so I wouldn't expect these statuses to work, but you never know. I choose to take on World 4-2 next, since that area has my final colorless demon soul, giving me a fully upgraded baby's nail. It should tick for 7 now, which actually outpaces Death Cloud. While fighting my way to the boss, let's talk a minute about the boss design regarding status effects. There's only 1 boss who can be plagued, 7 who can be poisoned, and 6 who can be bled, with some overlap in there. Early bosses were immune to almost everything. It's the later bosses actually who tended to be more susceptible to statuses. I thought that was weird. The bosses in Demon Souls are divided among 5 areas, with the first, second, and third boss in each area. Let's assign each boss 1 point per status that you can use on it, to a maximum of 3 points. So considering the first boss across each of the 5 areas, there would be 15 possible status vulnerability points for the Depth 1 bosses. Well, among these first bosses in each area, they all together score literally 1 point for the bleed you can inflict upon phalanx. Among Depth 2 bosses, they only score 5 points, anchored by the Flame Lurker being susceptible to 2. At Depth 3, 7 points. The Penetrator is susceptible to 2, and the Old Monk is the only boss who's susceptible to all 3. Then, the single boss at Depth 4, who is kind of the final boss of the game, is susceptible to 2 of the 3 statuses, which, if you extrapolated for 5 bosses, would be 10 points, meaning that bosses at the end of the game are more susceptible to status effects than ones early on. That feels backwards? I just wish a couple more bosses were susceptible to a couple more status effects, since it only really makes sense to inflict these on higher hit point enemies anyway. There's no reason, for example, that Armor Spider, Fool's Idol, or Leechmonger shouldn't be able to bleed, or why literally everything should resist plague the way it does. On that note, the old hero, who's just a dude, is only poisonable, so we kill him with poison, and we pick up an armload of poison arrows as well to use with our longbow from earlier. Now do you see where that's going? World 4-3 is up, and its boss, the Storm King, a massive flying boss who actually can be poisoned. Now he's in the sky, so we have to hit him with poison arrows. It takes 3 consecutive shots to poison his minions, any break from shooting them, and the buildup backs off, and it's very tough since they're constantly in motion. Once the minions are gone, I wait for the Storm King to make passes at me, which then lets me pincushion his belly and get him sick to his stomach. After inflicting poison twice, doing a lot of waiting, and firing some additional arrows to make sure the status deals the killing blow, Storm King is handled. I'm pumped up now for Maneater Revenge. Really nothing has changed since the last attempt. They're still immune to plague, and my weapon does the same damage. My hit points are a little bit higher, but every time I died previously was to gravity anyways. Still, with renewed confidence and some lucky bad AI thanks to the Thief Ring, I poisoned these guys down. Now, I tried my hardest to get a bleed, but as far as I can tell, it never procced, and therefore they're effectively immune. The boss after Maneater was the only one in the game that I was able to plague. The boss of World 3-3, the Mad Old Monk, is normally an online boss that warps in another actual real-life player to put on this weird headpiece and act as your boss. Now, if you're offline or it can't find a player, you get the stand-in NPC instead, who is susceptible to all three. This fight was hilarious for me. I wanted to be delicate with their hit points, so I used my non-damaging cloud spells to apply both poison and plague, then I sliced a couple of times to get bleed. To amuse myself while waiting, I destroyed every piece of furniture in the room while they chased me around, but then the boss actually forgot about me somewhere in there and camped by the door, quickly dying under triple status effects. I did the only reasonable thing, I popped some popcorn and enjoyed the fruits of a long labor. 3 bosses left now. World 1-3's boss, the Penetrator. There are relatively few fights in Demon Souls that are just about tight combat performance, but this is probably the best example. He's just a big guy with a dark sword, no gimmicks. It's very Dark Souls 2 of him. Now you can trivialize this fight with an NPC summon, but instead I got there with poison. Allegedly he could be bled or plagued, but for the life of me I couldn't proc either of those. That leads us to the final real boss of the game, the imposter Old King Allant. He is the only 4th depth boss in an area located in World 1-4. Now, Allant gets poisoned very easily, and he bleeds without too much trouble either. The best opportunity is when he floats across the room at you like the Babadook. With a well-timed roll, you can get behind him and get several easy slashes in. With the final tough boss down, the final boss is intentionally anticlimactic. The sick old actual king has very few hit points, and he poses very little threat to you. Unfortunately for me, it looks like becoming the Demon's Soul also supercharged his status defenses because I cannot get anything to proc on this guy. We slash him down for great justice, then as the nail in the coffin, I poison the woman in black to get the bad ending and roll credits. Concluding thoughts on status effects in Demon Souls. For bosses who are susceptible, it is a fine way to augment your damage, but unless you're doing a challenge run, you should expect to deal a majority of your damage directly. I'm not going to die on this hill, but I just feel like if you're going to bother putting these effects in your game, there should be some reason to use them. Regular enemies are almost dead by the time you get the status on if you're not using the cloud spells, and many of the enemies also heal up at low hit points anyway. Too many bosses are immune to statuses to make them a main strategy. There's only one big use case for statuses, and it's pretty specific. Human NPCs, be it Black Phantoms or that one beefcake in the mausoleum. Against them, yeah, hit them with status effects, then turtle. Poison is objectively the best status effect of the 3, both for the number of bosses susceptible to it and for the ease of application. You can choose to start with kunai, you can get a mercurial weapon and buy poison arrows after just 1 boss, and you can get poison cloud after beating 2 bosses. If you're going to bleed, the magic sword Makoto is probably the best bleed option because the bleed on that is innate, and the weapon just does good non-bleed damage as well anyway. Doing tearing upgrades on weapons to give them extra bleed just is not close to compensating the upfront damage sacrifice you make from normal upgrades. Lastly, Plague, it's just not helpful. My dear, sweet, precious baby snail just did not live up to my expectations at all. Will not try this again. These are very zoomed in takes on the design though. Considering the bigger design picture, it feels like the developers were actually a little less comfortable letting you play the game on your own terms than we see in later Soulsborne titles. Depending on how you slice it, most bosses in this whole game could be considered gimmick fights. Shoot the Dragon God with Ballistae, attack the Tower Knight's heels to knock him down, parry Garl Vinland. Demon Souls was a lot more prescriptive about how you should interact with it in a way that feels very 2009. I actually really enjoy gimmick fights in Souls games because it feels like I get to exercise my brain a little more than my thumbs. But refusing to let more bosses get hurt by status effects is a small way in which I can feel the older design of Demon Souls. From Software does take a more nuanced approach to this in later games, where a boss may look and fight like a regular boss, but secretly be a gimmick boss if you can figure out that, for example, Frostbite is extremely effective against it and use Frostbite a lot. We're winding down now. Thanks again for watching through another Jimothy video. I am overwhelmed by the support y'all showed my previous Dark Souls video, and I am very happy to get more Souls content out to you. I am, however, chiefly a variety channel, and will continue to make videos on all genres, Souls included. Please stick around and consider subbing if you enjoy my content. I am also on Twitch on Sunday and Thursday evenings under the same handle if you want to join me live. For upcoming content, PlayStation VR 2s are reaching consumer hands this week, so if I can figure out how to record that, expect to see some VR content soon. I'm also planning on dusting off Elden Ring for the first time since launch for a very unique challenge run. As always, comment to suggest any specifics you'd love to see, and have a blessed day.